Greetings, friends. It's Christian here again, coming to you with our Lenten reflection for week 5. First, I just want to say it's great to be able to be with you, to come to you and offer something to think a little bit about, both during Lent and during the time that we're going through together. So I want to remind you that in addition to these Lenten reflections, you'll be able to find on the page on colonialchurch.org under Hope Interruptions, a place where there's scripture text that you can memorize for this week, as well as a prayer. This week's prayer comes from Howard Thurman. So today, the theme that I wanted to leave you with, and just to give you something to think about, is what I'm calling Rest for the Weary. And it is rooted in a passage in Matthew chapter 11. And that passage reads, "Come to me, all you who are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So this, just a couple of things for you to think on regarding this verse and this particular week. One is that this is probably one of the most gentle, kind, and intimate invitations to follow Jesus that we have in the New Testament. There are lots of other places where Jesus calls on people to come and follow him, but this one is very, very intimate. And he even says something, he was effectively saying something like, "Come and follow me. Come and learn from me, and I will give you rest." That in and of itself seems to make this worth a scripture worth maybe memorizing, committing to memory. But the other thing I wanted to call your attention to are just a couple of the words that show up in this particular text that touch on our theme. One is the notion of being burdened or weary, and the other is the rest that Jesus promises. The word for those who are weary and those who are weary and burdened, is a word that shows up throughout the Greek Old Testament, and it refers to people who can be coming from a variety of places in their life. On the one hand, it can refer to folks who are just dealing with the pressures and the burdens of everyday life, right? The incessant coming at you of decisions that you have to make, responsibilities that you have, and the ways in which those things can overpower you sometimes. It also, though, can refer to people who are struggling under crushing poverty, or people who have experienced significant injustice, people who perhaps are differently abled, and because of that, their access to a full life maybe is at times made more difficult. So there's a whole sort of large number of possibilities as we think about what it might mean to be burdened. The other, though, element is those who are burdened in some ways because they take too much onto themselves, right? They believe that the world or their life will only be successful if they take care of everything, if they do everything. And this, of course, can even extend to those perhaps who think that they have to be super religious or uphold a certain high standard of religious obligation, that somehow their salvation maybe even rests upon that. And Jesus is saying that all those folks coming from all those different walks of life are invited to come and to lay down their burden and to walk with him. And what he gives to them is rest. Jesus says, of course, if you take my yoke upon you, and the word there for yoke, or the concept there, is if you listen to my teaching, if you learn from me and do as I say. And the word rest there connects to the Sabbath rest. It's not just about a cessation of action. It's about something closer to shalom. And if you remember from a couple weeks ago, that was a theme that we picked up. But the idea that shalom points to is a notion of wholeness, of comfort, of restoration, of spiritual restoration, connection with God, connection with our neighbors, connection with the earth. All of those things are what Jesus promises. And of course, to a certain extent, that's what we're looking towards, right? That's what we're hoping for God's future to come towards us when the final day, the final trumpet sounds. But Jesus' promise in Matthew is not just that this is something that's going to be given to us after we have died or at the end of all things, but that we can, even in this life, have some small taste of that rest. That is truly the promise that Jesus makes to us. Now, Lent, I've said this a couple of other times, is really an invitation. It's not an invitation to become more pious. It's not an invitation to become more religious. It's rather an invitation to try to follow after Jesus. And that can look differently for different people. But my hope and prayer for you is that as you try to follow Jesus, whether it's through participating in certain Lenten devotional activities or simply in your day-to-day trying to show kindness and gentleness to those around you, that you will begin to experience God's Sabbath rest. So blessings to you, and I look forward to speaking with you next week.